All right, looks like we are live with today's Sporecyte webinar. I'll just wait a couple seconds. It's kind of fun. I'm seeing people that are logging on. So we've had really good success with these webinars where we're just answering questions. I like calling it, like questions from the field or questions from inspectors. But I think I know I really enjoy these. I hope you guys do too. So we'll give it a couple more seconds and then we'll get started. Okay, that's probably good enough for a couple more. I'll get started. So again, the theme of this webinar is going to be, you guys be the expert. 10 questions that your clients, might ask you, but your clients want answered about mold and how to answer them. So I've got to give some, we had a lot of help on this from our lab director, Dylan McIntosh, and our marketing director, Ashley, and they have done the bulk of the work. So I'm lucky. I'm just getting to, bear the fruits of their labor. So thank you to those guys. The agenda today, we'll go through a few short things about Sporecyte and our parent company, TechCyte. Most of you guys probably know that, but I'll go through it again for those that don't. Then we've got 10 questions that we've taken as we're preparing this, and then we'll have some answers to each of those, and then we'll have some Q&A. But feel free as we go through the webinar to post questions in the chat channel. And if there's something, that Ashley feels is super relevant to whatever question we're on, we might take that, or we might just hold all those to the end. But if you've got questions, just post them up now, and we might take them now, but we might hold some to the end as well. So me, Jim Bates, Director of Sales. You guys have been seeing me for years now. I've been at TechCyte now for 6 years. So, well, I've got 2 more weeks and I'll be here 6 years. A little bit about the company TechCyte. Again, that's the parent company. Sporecyte is a vertical. It's the environmental vertical within TechCyte. TechCyte was founded in 2013, and it's fun that when we started, in machine learning, artificial intelligence, it wasn't such a buzzword as it is now with, the advent of ChatGPT and generative large language models. We use computer vision, which is a different form of AI. But people are so much more versed in it, which is kind of fun going to conferences, and they know a lot more about AI. In the beginning, people didn't know very much about AI, not nearly what they have right now. So, we use AI. We train our AI using machine learning and computer vision. So we have actual data sets of images that we train our AI models on. We call it digital microscopy, but they're actually microscopes that digitize images. So there's no eyepieces, that you would see on a normal microscope. Basically, there's different formats, but it basically looks like a computer that you'd set on your desktop, and you put the samples in there, and the microscope does its work. So Sporecyte specifically looking at air samples and surface samples, but in the other algorithms that we do, we're also doing liquids like blood, things that are smearable, could be fine needle aspirate, all kinds of things like that. We do now both in the human and veterinary or animal fields. We're doing clinical pathology as well as anatomical pathology. So in addition to like air, liquids, smearables, we're also doing tissues, things like that. All kinds of super interesting things. So our AI products are used by labs. In the case of Sporecyte, our own lab is using our own technology, our own AI and other software that we've developed. But in the human world and veterinary, other labs, pathologists, doctors, veterinarians, and in our case, home inspectors, building inspectors. So I mentioned the verticals within TechCyte. So TechCyte's the parent company. Sporecyte's our environmental vertical. In the human vertical, we also call it TechCyte, human analysis. But the Mayo Clinic is our primary collaboration partner. Anytime we're developing software products, AI products, we need samples and we need experts. So in this case, Mayo Clinic would be providing us samples of what we're working on, experts help us identify, build the data sets, and build the AI models. In the veterinary world, we white label our product worldwide to a company called Zoetis, which is the largest animal health company in the world. It used to be Pfizer Animal Health, and we are doing hundreds of thousands of samples, monthly all over the world in that space. Our laboratory, so we do participate in the AIHA MPAT program, which is a spore identification, making sure that we as our software and also our analysts are good at identifying spores. We're a licensed lab for mold analysis in the state of Texas, and Texas is the only state in the country that requires a specific license and protocol for you to qualify as a licensee in that state. So the other thing that we have is our ISO accreditation. So that's a laboratory accreditation for the type of analysis that we are doing. So we have that from PGLA. So you'll hear sometimes like, oh, is that lab accredited? What they're talking about is this specific ISO standard, 17025. So if you've got any more questions about that, feel free to ask. But if anybody's asked if they're an accredited lab, that's what they're really asking about. Let's see. We've also got this kind of logo here, PAACB, which is the Pan American Aerobiology Certification Board. And that is Dylan McIntosh, our lab director. He is a certified mold analyst or mold biologist. I can't think of what the right word would be. So he's very, he's dialed in and all that kind of stuff. What mold samples are, what air particulates we're looking at. Okay, so as you guys all know, probably most of you, we charge $20 per sample. So a typical job of 3 samples would be $60 for the lab fee. We turn the reports around the same day we get the samples, as long as we get them to our lab before 1 o'clock in the afternoon Mountain Time. If we get them later than that, we'll still probably get the report out. We try and get everything out every day, but it's guaranteed if the samples get there before 1. So if you're using our overnight shipping, we usually get samples in between 9 and 10 in the morning, and we'll make sure we get those out. You can also use your own form of shipping if you want to, and so then we'll get them when we get them. Again, we don't charge for our overnight shipping or our lab fees until we're about ready to hit the send button on the computer to email the report to you. So those things are charged, on the backside. Okay, jumping into the 10 questions. Let's see. Okay, has anybody heard this one? My room smells musty. Can you tell me, is that mold or is it something else? So the answer to that one is, musty odors can point to mold growth, something going on, but it's not always mold. So the odors can come from, all kinds of microbial, volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, or MVOCs in this case, because it's microbial. Other VOCs could be, formaldehyde or off-gassing from carpet or paint, things like that. But this is, MVOCs. So the MVOCs are compounds released from microorganisms like mold, could be yeast, bacteria. So there's multiple things that could be going on. One thing that you'll see sometimes, if you'll see, discoloration on a wall, people will be like, oh, that's obviously mold. And it very likely could be, as as inspectors, we usually don't just say, oh, that's mold, because it could be something else. It could be some kind of a bacteria growing on a wall or something like that. So in those cases, if they really want to know what it is, we do a surface sample on those. So I like this bullet. Well, it's not exclusive to mold. Musty smell is a clue that, you want to do a further analysis or further thinking. They certainly want to know, what's happening that's causing that smell, and what's happening that's causing the cause of the smell. Let's see, here's our next one. Let's see, there was a previous water leak in the basement. Should I be concerned about hidden mold? And the answer is, yes, on several levels. So, first, obviously, water leak, a pipe, any kind of leaking. Sorry, my phone is ringing. Let me turn that off. Apologize. So it could be, any kind of a water leak that's noted in a seller's disclosure form. Could be, that you're seeing, window leak or a foundation water coming in or moisture growing there. So anything, any hidden moisture can, cause mold to grow. You don't always see mold growing, as you know. So even though the surface looks fine, mold might be growing, in the carpet or someplace else that you just don't see. Or just, it's just barely beginning and you're just not seeing it. Let's see. Whether mold form depends on how long materials were wet. So that does have an impact, how long materials have been wet. It doesn't take very long for the mold to start growing, but if you spill water, in your kitchen on the kitchen floor, or it gets out, by your kitchen table or something, it's not going to start growing mold right away. It takes a little bit of time to get going. And we've got some more timelines on our next slide on that. So I'll wait till we get there. Past water events, I would always, follow up and make sure that a past water event that you note, and you guys know this, always make sure that that was cleaned correctly, that whatever was causing the water or moisture problem, is completely fixed. I know I sold a house, my own house, 6 years ago, and I took the refrigerator out and it all looked good. I had made sure that the water was shut off. I left the house, came back the next day, and that water had leaked all over the kitchen floor. It cost me several $1,000s to fix it. So even though you think you've got something done, past owner, like, oh, I fixed that, always good to test. All right, question 3. Can mold be present even if there are no visible signs? So I think we all know the answer to this, which is yes. So mold can grow, it's often found, behind walls, under flooring, inside HVAC systems. So as you're, if you can smell it, sometimes you can smell musty smells, that's a clue. But there's definitely mold that you don't see. I'll get inspectors calling me like, I didn't see any signs of mold, and I'm just blown away. Like, we're finding it, on this report, and it's great. Our report, as you know, has pictures of what each sample is having in it. The images pages. So it's really interesting to be able to say, yeah, absolutely. Here's what we're seeing. Here's why we're seeing it. And they're like, man, that place looks perfect. So let's see. Growth can begin. Again, back to the previous slide. Mold growth can begin within 24 to 48 hours of a moisture exposure. So if you spill water and clean it up, it's not going to be an issue. But if you have a continual moisture issue, it's going to start growing mold, fairly quickly. So the final bullet here, mold may thrive in dark, damp areas that are rarely inspected, which is why professionals can be testing even homes that look clean. I've had homes where inspectors called and they're like, gosh, we didn't detect anything, but our air sample, found some mold. And then later on, one case, there was a laundry room that had somebody taken the door off and put it behind the washer and the dryer, and there was a big leak. So the inspector didn't wind up seeing that in the inspection, and the air cassette caught that mold happening. All right, question 4: should I test for mold even if the seller already did remediation? So the easy answer is yes. And maybe that's not necessarily an easy answer. Maybe it's a harder, you don't really want to say yes, but I would say yes, because you want to verify that. Obviously you'd look and see what they said they cleaned up. Is that a visual inspection? Is that clean? Does it look like they fixed it right? But we've had times where people thought everything was fixed and working well, and there was something still going on. There was just a slight moisture leak, or they hadn't fixed the right problem. That would be, typical of that. They missed something as a seller, like they found something on a windowsill, but there was also a little leak along the foundation. So it's always good to double check. A third-party mold test ensures that there's no remaining issues. I guess that's kind of what I said. So it's always good to have that extra step for your clients. All right, question 5: can mold spores from outside affect the test results indoors? So again, the answer is yes. Mold spores can come in from outside. So as you look at our report, you've got the 3 sections of our report. You've got the first section, which is at a glance. Is there a problem? Is there not a problem? And then the second section is the lab portion, where we've got the mold spores divided into categories. And then the third section is the images. But the lab portion, where we've got mold spores divided into categories, that first category is indoor water-related spores. So those are specific spores that, they grow well on building materials, in the built environment. If there's the right amount of moisture present, then they're going to grow. So the second section is indoor-outdoor spores, and those spores grow well on building materials indoors, but they also grow well outdoors, and they're designed to float around. So they'll come through your windows, your doors, small cracks, in your foundation or your walls or your soffit. So they'll be coming into your house from outside. The thing I moved off on too quickly from that first section, those first section of spores, you'll see I can't remember if there's like 8 or 9 or 10 spores in that section. Those spores are in that indoor water related because they're like clumpy or sticky or heavy. They're not designed to get airborne and fly around, to fly through your windows. They're more designed for a beetle to be walking by and spores get stuck on his leg and he walks a little bit further and those spores get stuck up on something else. One thing Sporecyte does do, you'll see that Aspergillus penicillium, string is in that first indoor water related. So aspen string, and then you'll see in the indoor-outdoor Aspergillus penicillium. So our software allows us to look for the strings, which is kind of the growth indicator or growth structure for Aspergillus penicillium. You'll see these little spores, they're typically fairly round, stuck together in a chain or a string. And then those things pop off individually as they move away from the source. So we put those into the water-related top section when we find the string of spore, and then the individual spores are counted in indoor-outdoor. So apologize for making that such a long answer. But when we find that top category, water-related indoor, those are really strong indicators. So you'll see on your reports, anything in that top category, it will get flagged quicker than in the indoor-outdoor spores. Then that third category is outdoor spores, which you can still get an indication of a higher concentration, but it's less frequent. So it takes fewer spores in that very first category to get a indication of overconcentration or a higher concentration than normal. So I didn't read the bullets. I just talked through that. Let's see. But we always do the outdoor sample as a control or a comparable. So if you're finding spores outside, we'll compare what number that is to what we're finding inside. But it takes fewer spores to be found inside in that indoor water-related category than it will take. Like you could have 13 spores or 50 spores, 40 spores in that category. It'll get a highlight where down below in the indoor-outdoor it'll show 40 spores, and that wouldn't get a flag. Again, but they are relative to the outdoor, but they're different. Each one of those has a different kind of algorithm on what makes it get a flag. I hope I explained that clearly enough. Sorry if it didn't do very good, but hopefully get there. Okay, Ash put up, Jesse asked, how would you recommend we as home inspectors air sample 1 story or 2 story home that has no visible signs of mold? So you'd always start with doing an outdoor sample. Oh, how would you recommend it? So if people have, they're like older, they might have some respiratory issues, or if they have young children that they might be worried would have, potential impacts on breathing or health, that would be a good time to test. Even though you can't use these reports to make definitive health calls, you can at least get a good idea. And if you're finding concentrations of mold, make sure that you mitigate those things. And that's really good for anybody. But if somebody were saying, well, I'm older, or I have young children, or I have children that are prone to allergies, things like that, that'd be a super good idea for them to get a test. The other reason that you would want to do it for sure is if in the seller's disclosure there was any indication of a past moisture event or water event. Even if it had been remediated and cleaned up, you'd still want to check. Some people, just aren't going to want it. And I always say, hey, if they really don't want it, they just aren't going to get it. Our reports also come out with particulates. So we are going to be adding a kind of an overall indoor air quality, which will take the particulate and the, hundreds of thousands of samples that we've tested. We're going to create a curve or a way to show, like in a typical home that we've looked at, here's where your overall particulate load is and whether, you should be cleaning your air or not. So there was another thing I wanted to bring up on the when to suggest somebody do an air sample or surface sampling. And I can't remember, but when I do remember what I was going to say, I'll come back and add that. So thanks for that question, Jesse. Here's another one from Dean. Let's see. Think when I'm struggling as someone new to mold testing. Where I'm someone new is mold testing, is the swab and the test cartridge options on Sporecyte website itself. Not sure what it absolutely needed to compare what is not and considered ancillary additional benefit. Thinking I need to know how to walk before I run, if that makes sense. Confusing in the Sporecyte website. In my humble opinion, I like that. Yeah, I don't know if that we've made too many changes to the website, but we continuously look at it and like, what could we do better? So yeah, any suggestion like that is good. So I think what you're saying is when you're doing surface sampling, so that would be a swab or a slide. And I would say in most cases, you would want to do slide sampling before swab sampling. So swab sampling, if it's like heavily loaded debris or super wet, where on the surface slide, there's basically, it's basically two-sided tape, but use the slides, not tape. So you would press that on. If pressing that on, whatever the material is that you're sampling, if that's not going to stick very well, then you could use a swab. But I would say 90% of the time, a surface slide is going to be better than a swab. So let you know that. When you're doing surface sampling, you don't take a control sample. So you wouldn't need to do an air trap sample outside. So if you're doing surface sampling, it's just whatever you're sampling surface, that's all you need. There's no control sample for that. Let's see. I'm hoping that got your question. So if that didn't answer your whole question, post up some more and I can go through that. What cassette to use? So that's a really good question. I was just at a conference for the AIHA conference in Kansas City last week. You guys have probably seen on our website. I wish I had one handy. I should have put one here, but there's a new cassette in town called the Air Trap XL that's made by a company called Apicore. And we sell those on our website. So you see those, but you'll also see that we sell aerosols as well. So the guy that invented the aerosols, his name is Dan Baxter. And I had dinner with him and hung out with him a little bit at the show. Dan invented the aerosol. We at TechSite do all kinds of tests, like, I always say the pee in the cup test or, fecal collection. So those are just something that's easy to say, but, with every one of these tests, bacteria, skin collection or something like that, the doctor will have a test kit. So Apicore is the company, they're out of England, and they make those test kits for us that are used all over the world in human health and animal health. They came to us a couple of years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, and said they wanted to, help Sporecyte somehow. So we worked with them on some initial design and development of a new air trap. So in the meantime, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine called me up and we were talking about air cassettes. I'm probably going way too deep into this, so I apologize. We were talking about air cassettes and what was happening in the industry and technology of air cassettes. I told him that we were working with this company Apicore on developing a new air cassette. And I got him in touch because he's like, oh, I want to buy some of those. Anyway, he's really good friends with Dan Baxter, and Dan Baxter then got involved and became the principal consultant for this new air trap, the Air Trap XL. By Apicore. So hopefully that answers your question. I would encourage you to use the Air Trap XL for a couple reasons. One, I do think that has some slightly better characteristics for capturing air samples. And I won't go into detail on that, but I could if you wanted to. And number two, those will move through the lab quicker. So I would encourage you guys to use those because you'll just get your results a little bit quicker. All right. So, but you can use I'd encourage you to either the Air Trap XL, which is by Apicore, or aerosols. So hopefully that was a long answer. Sorry about that. I better pick up the pace. So I think I talked enough about question 6. Let's go to question 7. How long do mold spores stay in there after a leak or a flood? This is a really good question. And I'm just kind of going to read this, and I'll comment on it a little bit. So mold spores can remain airborne for hours to days, depending on the airflow, ventilation, and activity in the area. However, once mold colonies grow and become established on the surface, they can continuously release spores until fully removed. That's why timely remediation and follow-up are critical in testing. So when you go into a home to do an air test, you'll want to turn on the fan so it's moving the air around, because if you go into a vacant building or a building that nobody's been in for a while, there's no air circulation, there's no people moving around. Everything's going to settle down. So it will, particulates in the air, unless something's disturbing them, eventually they'll settle down and, into the carpet or onto the floor. And so you won't find so much. So when you're doing sampling, you want it to be in a condition, you don't need to get a leaf blower and, blow things on the carpet or, start sweeping around. You want it to be kind of a natural living conditions. If people are moving around, doing what they would be doing in their normal lives, the goal would be to, see what they would be breathing in the normal conditions. So you would want to get a typical air column load of any mold or particulates. I think hopefully that answers that good enough. So if anybody has more questions on that, just put them in the chat. Question 8, will the report show what type of mold is present or just the quantity? So we do show the type and the quantity. So you'll see in our report that's showing the two top graphics. You'll see bedroom 1, it has a green and a red section, and then bedroom 1 on the right side has 3, kind of a green, yellow, red. The difference between those two graphics is the one on the left is for a surface sample. And in surface samples, we just say present, absent. We found mold growth, or we didn't. We will, where we write images, we'll tell you what kind of mold that was found there and what we found there. But it'll just say that. It won't give you a quantity on a surface sample. Where on an air sample, you'll get that graphic where it's green, yellow, red, and then you'll see the mold type and then the amount per cubic meter. So when you see that, the count, the numbers on the right indicate what is the per cubic meter, which is basically if you took your arms out, you're kind of taking an estimate of a cubic meter, and that's what amount of mold would be found in the cubic meter in spores. So I don't know that I did a great job in answering that, but hopefully, again, good enough. So we do give you on the surface sample, we do tell you that we found it. We don't give you a count like we do on the air sample. We just say we found it or we didn't. So it's kind of a qualitative versus a quantitative report. But we do tell you the mold and the mold type and if that we found it or didn't find something. Where the air, we give you the mold type and the count per cubic meter. All right, question 9. We're getting close. Can mold in an HVAC system, I apologize, HVAC system affect the whole house? So I like the answer, absolutely. So mold in an HVAC system is one of the fastest ways for spores to spread throughout a home. Once inside the ductwork, spores can circulate into every room, that runs off that ductwork. So it can lead to, widespread contamination. It's especially concerning because HVAC mold often goes undetected for long periods of time. And it's true. So, there could be different areas that are growing the mold. Like we had a job, it was actually in Phoenix. You guys probably heard this story before, but it's one of my favorites. I can't remember if it was an 8-plex, a 9-plex, or 11-plex, but it was a, kind of a smaller, but not tiny, not super small multifamily property. It had just been remodeled. And it's classic because it was in Phoenix. So the inspector calls me up. He's like, I can't believe it. This place looked perfect. And we've got tons of mold. And the mold that we were finding, we went to the images section, like sure enough, it was aspen and aspen strings. So we're finding these, chains, these strings of Aspergillus penicillium mold, and they were in all the units except one. So the property had a swamp cooler, and everything had been cleaned and updated, refurbished, but not the swamp cooler. So the swamp cooler was just growing mold and blowing that throughout the building. So it was really amazing, that they found that. So the tenants, weren't just breathing moldy air. So The other thing that you'll find in HVAC systems is if you've got ductwork that's not insulated and it's running through cold areas, you'll often get condensation in there, which can start growing mold. So it's definitely worth, considering as you're looking at those things. All right, last question. Let's see, will mold testing tell me if the issue is old or still active? So the answer is not directly. So most standard mold tests like air and surface identify the presence and quantity of mold spores, but they don't distinguish between, live, active, or inactive spores. So both can be detected and still pose a health concern. So I think I would say like anytime, let me go back. So whether it's old or active, so anytime that you're finding mold, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, you want to, figure out what's causing it or caused it and clean it up. So the type of cleanup you do depends on, what the problem was and how big the problem is. But if you've got mold, and let's say you had a water leak in the winter, like in my house, I get these ice dams. I'm going to have to spend a lot of money on the roof this year to make sure I don't have any more leaks. But I had some leaks, last winter. So I would clean them up, make sure I didn't have any mold growing. But a lot of people, might not notice that, or like, oh, I had some water leaks, but it's not leaking anymore. So even if it's not, growing now or leaking now, once that moisture problem comes back, you're just going to get mold growing again. So even if at the time you think, oh, maybe it's not a big deal, it's probably going to be more mold growing down in the future. Let's see. So then that next bullet, if there's uncertainty, additional testing such as moisture readings, infrared imaging, or other professional mold assessments can help determine conditions are still conducive to mold growth. So again, I might say on that one, the condition might exist and then not exist, and then exist again and not exist. So you can be mindful of that. But it is good to do, as you guys know, thermal imaging and infrared, using a moisture meter kind of things. Those are all helpful in analyzing and going through and investigating the home. All right, let's see. David is asking, I've been taught that indoor environmental has to be closed 24 hours before testing. I don't agree, as it wouldn't be best to test the indoors as the client's normal lifestyle. Thoughts? So there are a lot of times they'll say, yeah, try to, keep the windows closed, for, I can't remember if it's 24 hours, but, they'll say like, have the people, keep the doors closed for a period of time and windows closed. So it limits the amount of spores that would be coming in from the outdoors. So I think in most, real world applications in what we're doing is, you've got people living in the properties, you're coming in for the new buyer. So to have the seller like button up their house in advance is often, not very realistic. And I think Dylan would say it's probably good practice too, if they could do that, but in the real world, it probably doesn't happen very often. And I don't know how much I couldn't say how much that really impacts the report. I think it probably doesn't have a huge impact. It might impact a little bit, but would it throw off the results of the report? I would hesitate to say, yes or no. My feeling is that it wouldn't affect it enough to not spot a problem if there is a problem. I'll leave it at that. Maybe I'll check in with Dylan and post up something as a follow-up to that. Let's see. Vincent asked, how would you explain it to a client, the difference between slight and major as reported for spore counts? So that's a super good question. And it becomes, more, I was like, using some very big jargon here, nuanced. So when we find heavy concentrations, we're finding a lot. There's no EPA guidelines on, what constitutes heavy or slight or normal. So for indoor air quality, there's no oversight body, there's no government, direction on what this is. There are people and groups that have kind of published their own, like, here's what we think the right numbers are to indicate that. So our lab director has used that information to create what creates these flags for, major or slight. Slight, if you find something that's major, then there's probably realistically something going on that needs to be checked out. So slight would be, I think if you're finding any kind of concentration, you want to try and investigate where that's coming from. A lot of times we'll find something like, oh, there's a drain and the drain's got mold in it. And that could even create a heavy one. Or there's fruit on a counter that's molding. So especially when you go into a kitchen, be mindful of what's on the counter, what's in the trash can, things like that. Because we find things periodically where the home just has something, the dishes haven't been washed for a while. But to tell them the difference between slight, it would be, we're not finding, I would say major, you definitely want to investigate, like, why are we finding major? Slight, I would say it's still, we should try and figure out what's causing this, but it's not, you can't say it's a huge problem, because even a little bit of mold, you want to find out what's causing it and clean it up, prevent what that moisture source would be. So even if it's slight, I would look at what it is. The other thing is, if it's slight in that first category, indoor water related, like, people will call those spores indicator spores, because of the way that they are distributed. Their way of distribution isn't to float through the air like the indoor outdoor spores. So if you're finding those, there's a higher chance that something's really going on. So I would say, if my client said, oh, I've got, this room has slight, but this room has heavy. And I had one of those today, and I talked to the inspector. One of them was, the heavy room was likely, spores were coming from that heavy room and then getting into the room that was a door down, as people were going in and out of the two rooms. But, to say, what should they do? In both instances, I would say, okay, let's try and figure out what is causing the problem. And if it's in that top category, that's a little bit, I would say, okay, these probably are higher indicators that something's going on in this area. If it's an indoor outdoor spore, I would still look around, but, again, double check, like, is this room being a sink for things coming from the out of doors and not getting cleaned up? And just collecting stuff over time. So that's probably not the perfect answer that you want, but it is kind of nuanced, trying to figure out what could be doing that in the room. But in any instance where there's mold spores, mold being found, I would definitely, try and figure out what that is. If you as an inspector aren't able to figure out what that is, and again, you're doing, my view on a home inspector, your job is to be an inch deep and a mile wide. You're not repairing, their plumbing, or, replacing the manifold where the water is coming in and then going out through the house, but to indicate, where these problems are. So I would always have an expert that you trust, or a few that you could, recommend if something's like going on that's a problem that you see, and that they could, move something to the next level. A lot of inspectors are that next layer of guy and can do a thorough inspection. So I hope that gives you some kind of help. I know I spent a lot of time on that and probably didn't give you like the perfect, here's the cut and dried answer, but it's kind of not so cut and dried, but worth trying to check out and see what could be causing it. Let's see. Pre-submitted. Okay, question 11. Ashley had to remind me there's 3 more questions. Sorry about that, guys. What do I need to do to clean up this mold problem? So I'm just going to read the bullets on this one, because it's probably makes more sense that way. So according to industry standards like the IICRC S520, so these would be, industry guidelines, and the R520, there are 5 key steps to properly address mold. So first, identify the mold, and really, identify that there is mold. If you see, any kind of mold, you'd want to clean it up. But it is good to understand if it's one of the indicator spores, or even indoor outdoor, you might be able to understand a little bit more about it. But anytime you're seeing mold, you'd want to clean it up. Determine the extent of the growth. So is it a small area or a large area? Contain that area, and then remove any cleaner moldy materials and verify that the cleanup worked. And I would say with the cleanup work, you'd want to clean it up and make sure whatever was causing the moisture is not going to be causing moisture anymore. So solve the problem that's causing the moisture. So part of how to clean up mold, you could probably look up these standards and see what they say, because some will say if the area is, so big, then you need to do these big, more lengthy, remediation procedures, where if it's a very small area, that's easier to clean up. And, something like if your whole wall is impacted, I've seen images where people have gone in very humid areas and they come home, they're gone for a month or something, their whole room is just wall to wall covered in mold. So that's something like you'd probably want to get a remediation company. If it's something that's very small, you can see, perhaps that's something that a homeowner could do on their own. But again, I don't want to tell anybody like this is absolutely what you should do. It depends on the situation, maybe the expertise of the person, and also, what you're dealing with. If somebody is like immune compromised, they wouldn't want to be handling mold or do anything like that. But these guidelines, this is the best thing to do, is look at what these guidelines are and then use those as a guide. We also have some things on our blog that you'll see there. You've discovered mold, now what? Remediation, home cleaning. And that will go through more of like, what's this surface area? Is it what's the mold growing on? Is it growing on tile or is it growing on drywall? Things like that. Let's see, question 12. Why are some of the spore counts highlighted as slight versus the ones that are highlighted as major? So I kind of just freestyled this answer a minute ago. So I'm going to read the bullets on this one. Hopefully it'll give us better, guidance. So we provide some initial broad guidance. Since we don't see the home, we can't be specific, but we try to help with direction. The Mold Resource Center on our website can give home buyers more information. So we do have a link on our website that provides resources on mold. So links to remediation kind of things, links to understanding, properties of mold, things like that. So you'll find those on our website, and the home buyer could find those as well. The goal of the report is to protect buyers and their investment. So as you guys know, just doing the whole home inspection is really, as home inspectors, you are, trusted, call it consultants, or, I wouldn't say advisors, but you're there to help them, protect what they're buying. Because it's going to be, for most people, it's the biggest investment, they'll ever make. Biggest purchase, biggest investment, and expensive, when repairs need to be made. And while I say that, I'd also say very rarely do I find out about mold tests that have prevented a sale from closing. Generally, if something's going on, they identify it, they can address it before closing, and it's not, it doesn't destroy the sale. It allows them to, get something addressed and fixed if need be before the sale. The projects or the homes that I know that have that their mold report has caused a sale to not go through, I would say that it's not just the mold report that causes it to not go through. There's also other things that they found, and in combination, it's like, yeah, that house is probably not the one to close on. But I would say, I very, very rarely do I know of home sales that a mold report impacts it so much that it can't be sold. If it does, usually they just find a way to fix the problems and address the problems. And I guess that's the last bullet. I should have just read the last bullet. It says issues found by buyers and sellers can find ways to fix the problem and close the deal. Okay, question 13. So what do all these spore count numbers mean? How to answer? I'm gonna read the bullets again. We classify and count all particulates as well as mold spores. What do all those spore count numbers mean? Okay, I had to go back and read. So we classify and count particulates as well as mold spores. So you'll see on the lab portion of the report, you've got the 3 different sections of mold spores, and then you've got a section of particulates. Next bullet, the results are reported in a standard count, so that /M3 is per cubic meter, so they can be compared. So in the industry, when you see these air sampling counts, the universal way to report that is on a per cubic meter basis. So then we add up everything, even things we don't show in the report, and I'll get that. And the total particulates equals mold and particulates in place, and place them in 3 categories. So I don't think we have let me look. So kind of what that's saying is, and we don't have the image here on the right under air samples. So that's going over the mold specific things that we're finding. So the type of mold and the count per cubic meter of mold. When you get down to the particulate section, you'll see that on every report, we're also giving you the particulate. So it'll give you pollen count, carbon, soil. We have human skin fragments, animal skin fragments. If we find insect parts, hyphae, because we don't know what kind of mold that hyphae might have come from or helped create. So we'll put all those things are things that we call out and count. So we just give you the count. Again, that's a count per cubic meter. Then we have below that, where we call it out on the specific, we'll have another total particulate. So there'll be 3 groups of that. 10 microns or greater, 2.5 to 10 microns, and sub 2.5 microns. So then you'll see 3 things like that that'll have all the mold, all the molds added to that, all the particulate that we've called out. And then there's things that we see that we don't call out and specify. But those 3 groups will then be totaled up on that total count that'll be in groups by size. So, and that's what in the future we're going to have this. I like to call it the indoor air quality for particulate, because we can only count things that we can see. We don't use VOCs in our reports. But that'll then give you an overall, home's indoor air quality for particulates. So hopefully that was fairly understandable. So any more questions? I guess I've probably taken more time than I should. So I appreciate everybody's questions and attendance. If you had questions that I didn't get or explain very clearly, feel free to send us an email with the question and we'll follow up with you. So thanks so much. Everyone have a great day.